Hello everyone, welcome to my podcast, and I'm very excited about today's podcast since we have Courtney Miller, who's the CEO and CTO of Visual Approach, mainly focusing on the airline industry. With everything going on in the airline industry today, definitely want to take Courtney's insights. Hi Courtney, if you can introduce yourself, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a real honor to be with you, Chandra. So, Courtney Miller, like Chandra said, I'm a business owner. So I run Visual Approach Analytics, and we focus on the aviation space. So we work with a lot of airlines, a lot of aircraft lessors in the financing space, as well as aircraft manufacturers, and we just spend time in data all the time. Now, the company name is Visual Approach, so because we named it that, we have to turn the data into a lot of visualizations, which actually works out quite well for us. And as we were discussing earlier, it turns out, I didn't even count, that I've been doing that for 5 years now.
Let our audience know about your journey, right? How I think you've been into airlines and what has gotten into airlines, right? What has gotten into in flying into the sky, and then getting into the the business side of it, right? We just want to know more about your journey.
Yeah, so goodness, what got me into aviation? I'll give you the real story. The real story is I was in second grade in Indiana, and we're under the flight path of Chicago, and there was a book in my local library called "What It's Like to Be a Pilot." It was all it took. That was all it took. So I went to school at Purdue University as a pilot, then went straight to Comair Airlines, which was the regional airline for Delta Airlines at the time, flying out of Cincinnati. Flew there for 5 years, finished my master's degree while I was doing that. It's what they don't tell you as a pilot. The training is intense, and you work hard, and you're in the simulator, and all these different potential problems that can come up, and then you're trained, and congratulations, and then you get in the airplane and nothing happens, which is good, which is good. So the very first thing I did was go enroll for my master's degree, and that's where I really started to pick up on the data side, and operations research that we called it back in the day. And when I finished my master's degree in 2006, my graduate research project was on something at the time called neural networks, right? And so using neural networks to forecast just various routes and capacity and traffic going forward. And the conclusion of the paper was that it wasn't quite ready yet, and it was accurate. It's just that linear models seemed to work just as well. That was in 2006. So since then, we've been working with these models in various capacities. I left the cockpit in 2007, and I joined DHL Express, the package express carrier, and that was a role that was not in the cockpit. So that was in the back office. That was what we call network planning. So deciding which airplanes fly where. Ton of fun. We got to play airline. I left there in 2009 and joined Bombardier Commercial Aircraft. So they're the manufacturer of aircraft, and worked in marketing and sales there for 11 years. And this is where we really worked with the airlines. And we would meet with the airlines, make our pitch for the aircraft, but it was very data-driven, very data-heavy approach. We were consultants. So we would meet with the airlines, and we would sit down and do consulting projects in effect. It's just that every single one of those consulting projects had the conclusion of, so you should buy our stuff, right? As you would expect. 2020 came around. Actually, it was before COVID. I decided to leave that and start Visual Approach. And it wasn't long after that, bada bing, bada boom, I'm sitting in a chair next to Chandra.
You brought up an interesting point, right? Mainly during COVID, that was a very challenging time, for most of the industries, and specifically for airline industry. So how did that impact you, overall?
Yeah, so COVID was, to say that it was impactful for the aviation industry is the understatement of the century. The traffic at one point during COVID, airline traffic was down 97%. So 3% remained in about April or May of 2020. So incredibly impactful time. Not a good time for the industry. I had just started my advisory and research firm, Visual Approach, in February of that year. COVID really hits in March. That's really where it kind of affected globally. And I can say that my timing could not have actually been better, because the very first thing that everybody needed were answers. They needed to be able to not just dig through the data, but know which data to dig through, how to look at it. If you remember at this time, people were saying, we'll never be face-to-face in an office again. We'll certainly never do podcasts face-to-face again, right? There was this sense, and since we'll never be in the same place again or work from offices again, what's the future of travel look like? So a lot of questions, which was actually really good for my business, because we were able to bring the data together and provide some context around what was actually happening. And if you remember, by June or July, people had started to travel again. It took a couple of years before we got back, and I think we just it was about mid last year, we just got back to 2019 levels. Oh, wow. So there's a solid 4-year gap from which we started growing again. So that's essentially what defined the first part of my business. It was terrifying from a perspective of everything just blew up. 97% down. I mean, what do you do? And the phone wouldn't stop ringing because nobody knew what to do, right? So there was, obviously, there was a lot of fear, just everybody, right? A lot of unknown, but just kind of hanging out, calming down, and looking at the industry, the data, the numbers, the context, without the fear, turned out to be incredibly lucrative. I could have pulled the plug and gone back to what I was doing. Of course, I'm glad I didn't do that.
How did the industry, before COVID and after COVID, right? How did the industry move towards how they look at the data today?
So there's a progression that happened across COVID, right? So it was happening in the mid 2010s. We just used to call it big data. I mean, that was kind of the buzzword in the 2010s. That just meant all the data. So everybody just wanted to get the big data. They wanted to put it on the cloud, which just meant other people's computers, right? And then COVID happened through this trend, right? So we just kind of picked up that trend, but because the industry was down so much, it looked like it's growing so much faster, because when it came back and caught that trend, here's where we were. I think the big difference in how the industry is reacting to this data is actually a human condition rather than technical. This is what I found is most affecting the industry. For instance, before, when we would work with investors or airlines, looking at, okay, what should we plan for? Give me a worst case scenario. Back then, we would look at, say, 9/11, and we would say, things could get really bad, and they could be down 20%. Okay, let's bake in that terrible worst we've ever seen scenario. Well, that worst we've ever seen scenario is now 97%, right? So now we're dealing with forecasting moving forward with not just the idea that an industry being down 97% is possible, but the very tangible memory of it doing just that. So how these firms plan moving forward, even though the data shows what it shows, all of the models are now skewed by this exogenous event that was a global pandemic. And we've seen it. Somebody would sneeze in China and people would freak out, and the numbers would come back down again, but they would always kind of come back. So it's more kind of a question of, the usage of the data has gotten more granular. We have better models just by the progression of technology, but it's that human element that lays on top, and the perspective that everybody seems to have, and the memory that I don't know if biasing is the right word, but it's affecting how people see and think of things like worst case scenario. That's really the biggest difference that I noticed today versus say 2019. Those pesky people.
In no, so with data and AI, right? Now that I think last 3 years, we've all seen a lot of changes. Mainly in data and AI space. How is that impacting the airline industry, right? Just overall, I think what is the biggest impact that you see with AI being in place today?
I have to ask the question, what do we mean by AI, right? Because in the public lexicon, AI started like 2 years ago with ChatGPT. We would consider AI today has been in effect. I mean, we would call them optimization models. We would call them neural networks. Certainly, just all these types of models that we would now classify as AI have been in use for decades. I mean, they truly have. That has been the forefront. So we haven't seen really much of a difference, not because AI hasn't made its way to the airlines, but because it already had, right? So the large language models, not so much. We're not seeing a big difference in aviation, at least now. We are seeing just more kind of implementation of various AI models. For instance, trend monitoring, which is a term we use for basically predicting maintenance events on aircraft. If we see a certain component pulling higher voltage, well, we know the likelihood that it could fail or need replacement, so we'll pull that beforehand as an industry. But again, all of these things were in play before OpenAI and before ChatGPT. The actual advent of the LLMs actually has not changed much, mostly because aviation is so safety focused, and the LLMs are kind of focused in different directions. So we haven't seen the type of disruption that we have seen, like say in the coding space or the development space. But it's still in use, just not at a well. It's in use now more than it has been, but it's trending over a 20-year period in aviation, particularly in that airline pricing environment.
Makes sense. With the AI in place right now, data and AI, right? Even machine learning. Uh, I mean, if you since you've been so familiar with the data of it, right? Being in the airline industry for so long, where do you think you see a huge improvement? Where you're applying the new technologies and new Gen AI, right? Where do you see the where you can where you can revolutionize the industry, right? So make a huge impact in the industry.
Well, I mean, in aviation, optimizing pricing, as I mentioned, network design. This is more from that machine learning perspective. Kind of, I call it the more traditional. Also, kind of the more long term. On the generative AI side, I mean, there are a little bit more applications that are happening in the actual design, whether they be of components, of manufacturing techniques, the type of things that you would expect in aviation. But really, kind of moving forward, we're seeing a lot. We're at this interesting point in aviation right now where we've gone through a massive technological improvement cycle, just from an aircraft perspective. And there's really nothing coming. And with that, there's also the promise of a huge step in technology. And there's this gap right now. And remember that aviation is so safety focused. So bridging that gap from the A320neo, the 737 MAX, A350, all these new aircraft, and hydrogen electric, hybrid electric, blended wing bodies, these type of new designs is really that gap that is very likely going to be, I don't want to say filled, but augmented by AI. I mean, when we in aviation, the type of work that we're doing with AI in that level is very truly augmentation because of the safety, the focus on safety in aviation, the technical requirements. So from that perspective, and remember that aviation was actually a very early user of this type of technology. Now, from the generative side, I mean, absolutely, we're seeing. I mean, marketing and communications, and I don't mean to suggest that those are the only places, but for pure generative AI, that's disrupting just like it has been anywhere else. And I mean, look, even in aviation, there's a term that we haven't heard necessarily very often lately, and that's terms like blockchain. Like, there are great uses for blockchain that don't have anything to do with cryptocurrency. So, AI it's disrupting in the way that it's going to disrupt in the industry, but it's really an industry that's on the front edge. It's probably on the second edge, where the bleeding edge technology is vetted, and once it's safe, aviation is right there, kind of pushing forward on that technological frontier.
I mean, within AI, there is this huge technology space, right? I mean, you have a lot of technologies. I mean, what is that you've used so far, and why?
Well, so like I said, we build a lot of in-house models. We neural networks, machine learning, all the way up to transformers. Before that was called an LLM. So that's just in data exploration, finding the trends in data, forecasting, applying those forecasts in a manner that allows for the unknown. We do a lot of decision tree forecasting, but from the pure AI, we tend to use Claude the most, and Sonnet. What are they on now? 4? Is that right? I think that's the most recent. But look, I mean, we even built our own internal ETL processes that touch Claude or even ChatGPT here and there, just more from an agentic flow. We very heavy in Python programming, so as such, we're heavy users of just not code completion, but just code generation, right? So probably the 3 languages that we use most, Python for sure is heaviest for us, and we're very heavy AI with that, as you would expect, and in all the data models that come with that. PHP for some of our web stuff is probably second, and then just some light JavaScript, all of which we use generative AI to code, but not in a no-code environment. It's not even a low code. It's a full code environment. We're pinging the models to really just kind of do the first level scaffolding and bring in that code. And that's probably more of the recent kind of applications.
Apart from pricing, when you look at the data today, right? I mean, with all the, I mean, since you're always traveling, reaching out different airline industries, and you pretty much have the first-hand information from most of the CXOs of the world today, right? Mainly in the airline sector. What are some of the things that they are looking at today in terms of the data?
Yes, all of it. Look, obviously, one of the things that's an advantage for aviation is just the amount of data that we have. I mean, there's so much data available in aviation, whether it's your own data that you're getting from sensors from an aircraft, whether it's public data. Then we looked through that for a few projects where, the US publishes gigabytes upon gigabytes of traffic and passenger and capacity data to fleet, to aircraft position. So each aircraft every several seconds sends out a ping on its transponder so air traffic control can know where it is. Well, that's collected. It has a latitude, it has a longitude, it has an altitude, and maybe some other information, but 3 data points, we'll call it, once every 5 seconds times every airplane that's flying all the time. I mean, imagine what you can do with that level of data. So in aviation, we are just blessed with an abundance of data that we can play with. And so from there, actually, I think it's interesting because, if I mentioned that big data was kind of the term during the last decade, kind of in the 2010s, we've now reached a point in aviation where we probably have too much. We probably have too much data. So the value now, we've seen it shift. The value started in how do we collect the data? Just give me all the data. All the datas, I'll take them all. And this probably applies to pretty much any industry. To, okay, how do I work with the data? And what we found in aviation, what I spend a lot of time doing with, is working with data, understanding the biases that you can either intentionally or unintentionally inject into that data. Now we've kind of migrated to this position of, I need to know what to ignore. There's so much data out there. I need to know what to ignore. AI is really good at that, or can be trained to be really good at that. So we're using a lot of that to just kind of take a kind of a broad stroke over everything. I deal with so many people in my industry, competitors often, who say, look at this data, it says this, or it's pointing in that direction. And then we realize, well, if you look hard enough, you can find enough data that points in some direction, but is that even relevant? So we've kind of progressed through, I'll call it the macro data cycle, to the point now where the value extraction in that process is not in getting the data. It's not even in processing the data. Those are given, right? Those are the things that are happening. The value is happening, or it is found in extracting the so what. So kind of the old school insights, understanding what data is relevant, what's not, what's maybe even wrong, or some of the hardest stuff that we deal with, what's missing, right? If we look at something, what data don't we see? There's a great example in aviation from World War II where planes would come back with damage all over them during the war. And the goal of these engineers was to find, where do we put the armor? There's only so much weight we can add to this airplane. So where do we put the armor? Do we put it where we're seeing the damage? And what they realized, because that's what the data showed them. The data showed them that this is where these airplanes are being damaged. The problem was that there was a survivor bias. The airplanes that survived to come back had damage in those locations. The airplanes that had damage in the other locations didn't make it back. So the armor went where they didn't see any damage. And it was very effective. So this is a great example of how we've moved through kind of the different stages of how we deal with data, the conclusions that we build from them, to sometimes consider that the lack of data is just as important as the data that's pointing to different areas. That's kind of the level that we've gotten to. From an artificial intelligence perspective, is very useful because it's able to consider some of these missing pieces. It's you can really kind of see the evolution. I call it kind of data navigation through that process. That's where we are in aviation for sure, which is good because that's what my company does. So.
I want to focus on the dashboards in itself, right? Since Visual Approach we specializes in producing some of those dashboards for the airline industry. When you look at your dashboards, what is the storytelling for the airline industry?
Yeah, so a lot of and this is actually a change that we made in the business as we learned early on. The idea dashboards migrated. It adapted for us from dashboard as something that the customer uses to the customer ultimately asking us the question. Well, actually, here's the first question we got. They would say, hey, this dashboard looks great. Can I print it off? Like, do you have any idea what yeah, you could print it off. He's great. Actually, you know what? Could you just tell me what it says? Right? I could. I'm going to charge you more for it. And they say, sounds great, right? So there was, and just specifically where my business is focused, kind of at that C-level advisory and research. What they were looking for was, I want the answer. Give me the answer and give me a great storytelling or a great story or a great way to explain to people why that answer is correct. A picture's worth 1,000 words. I know we've heard that saying before. It's never been more true. It's probably worth a little bit more than 1,000 words if it includes a data visualization. So what I've migrated the business to is building the dashboards for one user, and that's yours truly, right? Myself. And then we're producing the insights. So from that to the actual data storytelling, which is a term I'm not really in love with. It's more like translation. Like the data is telling a story. You just have to explain what that story is. The visual is everything. Whether that be probably the best chart of all time, the best graph of all time is a line chart. You can tell so many stories with a line chart to see how things have bobbed and weaved and put in, put in little call outs at each that points to each inflection point. You can really see the inflection points. And then you get into, okay, well, why? And that's really where the value lies in that data storytelling, as it were. You are looking at the what, and then you need to impart the why. And that's absolutely key. And that's more artful storytelling than working with the data. I also find that a lot of people stop at the technical competency of working with data, throwing it in pandas, pivoting it, Excel, I don't care, whatever, and through a SQL database and pulling it out and having a result, right? That's kind of the first step. I mean, if you give the data engineering guys their due, because they got it there in the first place, but just from the data analyst point of view, it's the extraction. Do we get it into do we extract the data that we're looking for? Then the next question is, okay, does it tell us anything? And a lot of people will get to a chart and they'll stop. They'll say, well, here's the chart. Does that chart actually explain what's going on? This is where the technical and the science side really shifts back into kind of the other hemisphere of the brain, the more, I don't want to say artistic, but more art conscious side. How do you communicate the essence of what's going on here? And you can do that with data visualizations for sure. I mean, we've seen amazing data visualizations. I've seen more people stop between the creation of the chart and the creation of a chart that actually tells a story. The leap between those two, there are very few just learning avenues to get through that. And the very first step in doing that isn't necessarily to even understand the data. The very first step in doing that is to understand who you're talking to, who you're delivering your story to. What do they know? Where can you start the story? Can you start talking about R squared and correlations, all these type of things, or do you need to, are you talking to, say people who aren't necessarily data focused, or an accounting team or a finance team or an HR team, right? They're all going to be very different methods through which you tell that story. But this is why that technical proficiency really is only the first half of what you need to do. And by the way, this is what separates pretty much anything that any technical discipline that you're going to find in a company is you have the technical proficiency, and that career path ends at specialist or senior specialist. Because in order to move beyond that, and to become a leader, to become, kind of move into management, is to be able to take that knowledge and apply it and communicate it and tell that story and bring people along with you. And I found that second half is the real tricky part. It just takes it takes practice, and it takes a feedback loop with the people that you're dealing with. But it's very different. I think that's very important to point out. I've seen so many articles and conversations to me that people say, AI can do data visualizations now. I'm like, yeah, trust me, I use it all the time. They said, so what you do is irrelevant. And I'm like, you can think that. I'm okay with you thinking that, because you'll produce terrible visualizations and it'll make me look better. But that's that human element that really starts with understanding what they know, then really understanding the data at a core level, not outsourcing the data retrieval to somebody lower, but getting in there, playing, say, what if, of 10 analyses that I start, only one of them on average makes it as a final piece of analysis or insight. Because the first 9 aren't because I screwed up anywhere. It's because we're constantly asking what if. Most of the time I sit down and I say, wow, I wonder if this is happening with the data. And we go through and I'll code this or just extract it from the database and very quickly realize, oh, nope, it's not. Okay. Right? Walking away from a hypothesis is just as valuable as following one all the way through to the conclusion. So I know that's a long, kind of self-indulgent explanation of how we do that storytelling. But if you split it between the technical and kind of the more human-focused, artful piece, communications piece, they're really kind of two complementary disciplines there.
Just another thing, right? How do you, with all the technology changing today, how do you put yourself where you have add advantage with your competitors?
That I think the easy answer is to just always be good, be better than them. Does that even count? Whatever, but it's a cop out, but it's also oddly true. So I'll give you an example. I work with a couple partners within Visual Approach. There are other companies, and we spend a lot of time together. And I'm constantly putting together new visualizations, new ways to find data. And what we're finding is that it used to be, so I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn. It used to be that on LinkedIn, the only data visualization stuff you'd see in aviation pretty much was mine, say 3, 4, 5, even longer, probably, even before COVID. So that was great. I was the only one kind of doing this on a consistent basis. Well, now a lot of people are. So does that mean there's no value in doing it? No, it means that the frontier, the edge of that specific discipline has just moved. So you have to be better. So we just are. Now, we're really good at that. This is where we excel. Like I said, it's not just in understanding the data. It's not just in understanding what the data says, but in what's missing, in what you may not see, right? The whole idea of correlation is not causation. That's a huge part of what we do. So looking at something that looks like an obvious conclusion and say, it might not actually be, right? So taking that next step, we call it competitive edge. We spend a lot of time using the word edge. And that for us involves two things. One, sharing. Just making sure that what we're doing is out there. A lot of what we do goes out for free. We just send it out to our clients, to our non-clients, to our competitors as well. They see it. And then the second part of that is allowing our competitors to copy us. Because when they copy us, It's like in Canada, we have a term, you skate where the puck is going, not where it is, right? So if we allow our competitors to be where we were, that means that we're still going to be ahead. So we don't worry about what they're doing. We are constantly pushing to find, okay, what's different. What's a better model that we can deploy? What are some better indicators of, we call them black swan events? What are some of these things that we should be watching going forward? And quite often, in as many times as that competitive edge is found in technical capabilities, just as many times it's found in actually taking a step back from that. We call it the 30,000 foot view, which is just take a look at everything and just, what's your feel? What do you think is happening here? Now go prove it, right? But without that context, it's all about context and nuance. That's a very human element. And then we'll take that, jump back into ChatGPT or Claude and be like, okay, which is great first layer for us, and then find the analysis. 9 times it doesn't work, then that 10th time it does, and that 10th time we've got something really great. So we just kind of continually do that process, and we want to improve our competitors along the way, not because we're altruistic or because we want them to, but because I've been called multiple times by clients and have said, hey, your competitor put out a chart like this. That looks like the stuff that you were doing. That reminded me of the stuff you were doing. It's like, man, you are on the front edge of this stuff. This is great. Like that's where we want to be, and people think of us as being there. So rock on. I mean, that's how we do it. Hopefully that train keeps running.
I would like to do some deep diving into data and AI space. With your current data approach for visual approach, right? How do you decide on what to use? Let's say, for example, do you use any kind of agents in the market today, or do you build your own agents, or how do you decide on some of these use cases, right? What's best for your industry?
So we don't start with the idea that we're going to use AI. We just need to figure out how. We start with, okay, what do we need to do? A lot of times, I will say, if we're forecasting something, it is, quite frankly, it's almost disappointing how good a linear model, y equals mx plus b works a lot, right? Just draw a line, and it's insane how close on a long-term trend that could be. I'll give you a great example of that, and that's COVID. We saw a long-term growth trend for aviation. Now it was exponential. It was growth curve. And then COVID dropped it down. Now there are a lot of models. I think there was an ARIMA or an OLAMA model that we were looking at getting into more granular forecasting, these more concurrent neural networks and recurring neural networks specifically. And the problem is that COVID really kind of screwed up the model, right? Because we had this exogenous event. That long-term growth curve over the disruption of COVID, it came back very, very close to that. So had we dumbed down the models, we would have been more accurate, specifically in the future. So that's kind of almost kind of a level of disappointment. But the type of work, so several agents. Most of the agents that we've built and have put into effect, they're not customer-facing production agents. They're more, I would consider them more on the automation side, doing types of things that you would expect mostly from the LLM APIs. So, like I said, we use Claude. So AI has been very effective for us at doing things I don't want to do. So for instance, I do a lot of writing. AI models are perfect for giving me a summary of what I just wrote. Give me a 2-line summary. That's great. A lot of time is saved in that process. Very simple application. The the GPTs are very, very good at that. We have some experience using Midjourney, but it's actually not very good at data visualization. It is a little too generative for the type of work that we're doing. So all of our agentic flows that include AI are pinging the APIs kind of where they need. We've also kind of looked at building RAGs. So a RAG specific for retrieval augmented generation, I think. RAG. The whole idea, and really what we're looking at is just the ingestion of PDFs specifically. So we use AI in various aspects here. One is just a traditional OCR, right? So the character recognition from an image, because we want to take a PDF, but we want to extract the text from that PDF. And there's a lot of work going on in this space right now. And some of the challenges that people really found early on was that a PDF is kind of an XML document. So when you extract the text from it, it extracts it left to right. Well, we have a lot of tables in PDF. So complementing kind of that traditional text extraction with OCR technology, now we're starting to get a full context of what is in this PDF, putting it in a database somewhere, in a vector database that we can then pull from when we run our own models. And this is something we spent a lot of time on. By the way, if you want to play with this idea, the easiest way is Notebook LM, which is mind-blowing. Like, we could say that about pretty much any AI model, but Google, here's a prediction for you. You've got OpenAI, you've got Claude, you've got Google. I'll call them kind of the top three kind of in the space. You've got Microsoft, I don't know, Copilot, whatever they're calling it today. You've got Grok, Llama, so Twitter, X, whatever we're calling them, Meta. I mean, Apple swears is playing in that space. I'm sure that it is. But of all of these different kind of language models, we'll call OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google as kind of the big three. Of those three, it's Google, believe it or not, that is most interesting right now. And these are the type of things we're seeing. And it's this PDF extraction and this RAG process that we found is most interesting, because the whole idea of building of retrieval augmented generation, I think it's generation, retrieval augmented something. The whole idea of this is you don't want to pull all of this text into context, dump it. You don't want to pull, 2 million words out of this document, dump everything into context of the model, fire that off, and then have the model be like, that'll be $100. Thank you very much for all these tokens. So you put it in your own database, and then you devise a system to retrieve from that vector database only the tokens that are only the text and information that's going to be useful for the question that you're asking. So that's retrieval augmented. A lot of really interesting stuff going on there. Some great kind of RAG architecture. And then Google went and did something. And by the way, this all happened around the same time that DeepSeek did something. It's actually, I think it's the change that we thought was earth-shattering, and then we thought, no, it wasn't, but really was. And this is where we're seeing the most change, I believe, right now in AI. And it's really, it's redirected us away from RAG and more back towards what we think the future of AI and the large language models will be. When DeepSeek came out, I think what people missed was it wasn't better than Anthropic. It wasn't better than OpenAI or Gemini and what Google had been putting out there. It was just way cheaper. But these models have peaked already. They peaked last year, right? The raw output of these monster models. I mean, if you look at, Anthropic is a great example. Anthropic has, or had, I don't know if they still do this, but they had 3 different types of models. You had Opus, which was like everything. It was their opus, their magnum opus, their biggest model. Then you had Sonnet, and then which was like a song in that opus, so smaller. And then they had Haiku, which is like a phrase. I heard like a small poem in there. And each model was of different size. Opus never really performed better than Sonnet at all of these big grand tasks. Yes, it did better in some, but in the aggregate, it was working kind of about as it was about as performant as Sonnet, way more expensive. Haiku, not quite as performant, but good enough for a lot of what you needed, way cheaper. So when DeepSeek came out, it changed the metric by which these models were being measured by. It wasn't raw output. It's now a cost-effective output. We've changed where the frontier is. At the same time, we've switched away from just the raw LLM to now include, and you're seeing a lot of the advancements that we've seen lately have come from applying reasoning models in addition, which is great. That's the direction that the models need to go, but we're seeing those costs come down. That's the real movement that we're seeing today. So back to the idea of the RAGs and how we're using the retrieval augmented system to really kind of extract the information from the PDF. What we found is that at the same time we were developing this process of optimizing this database search so that we load exactly what we want into the LLM, you had the costs dropping dramatically. And so Google comes out with Gemini Flash, which is in the 90s, performance-wise versus some of the larger models, but way cheaper. And with a 2 million token context window, which means I don't even need that database anymore. I can just dump it all in to Google. Now, it's not as powerful as the bigger models, but with that kind of context level. I think what's so exciting is the domain shift, the inflection point in thinking of how we think about these models. It went from which one is most powerful, gets the best scores, and I forget the tests that they do. Now you're adding the layer of reasoning, which is fantastic. They're all open to internet search now, which just augments things, really to cost and increasing the context window. That's fascinating. And that has, quite frankly, it's made our RAG system obsolete pretty much overnight, which is great because now there's a better way to do it. That is a long, overly winded path to talk to you about how we're thinking about these new models, what they can do, and how we change our mind just as things come out. But the difference, the changes going forward, everything is adapting. So the changes going forward aren't necessarily going to be just different versions of the changes that we had in the past. It's not just going to be, well, we just get a little bit more powerful each time. We're now introducing these other metrics, and that's really exciting.
That's pretty cool. One thing I wanted to ask is, when I look at AI, I look at AI as more of automation of automation, right? That's pretty much what it is in my opinion, right? And with this new scenarios, right? Where do you see like big changes for the for the industry in itself, right? For the next 5 years, do you based on the data that you currently have, and with all the new technologies, where do you see airline industry moving forward?
I think it's more of the same. I think in aviation and airlines specifically, it's that long-term trend for us. Mostly because the type of, this is a very process-driven, very human capital intensive industry just to move people around the world safely. So so let's talk about the possibility of pilotless airplanes. Could AI bring an advent of pilotless airplanes? Absolutely. But it probably won't. Not in our lifetime. And there's a very specific reason for it. And that is the number one role of a pilot isn't to fly the airplane. The number one role of a pilot is to make everybody feel confident to get on the airplane to begin with. Right? There's a confidence. What safety is all about in aviation is the confidence for people to engage in aviation. And so the shift away from a human pilot into AI is very, very difficult because now we're talking about human confidence. Because if humans aren't traveling, then we don't need travel at all, right? AI won't fly itself around. The other thing that we're seeing, or that we have seen, is the capability to remove the pilot from the airplane. The technical capability was available probably 25 years ago. We could have done it, right? That hasn't actually improved to the point where we would have done before. That's not what's preventing us from doing that in aviation. It's purely the human element. How comfortable are people? How comfortable are people getting on an airplane without a pilot? And number two, and this is just as important as we're seeing with all the new eVTOL players and these type of things playing out, is how comfortable are people with pilotless airplanes flying over their head, right? It's not their choice to have that happen. So we're seeing AI progress in these type of areas where we see like the self-driving cars, but there are reasons why that's not translating in that more traditional term to aviation like we necessarily would. But a lot is happening behind the scenes.
So, I think just want to quickly jump in there, right? You brought up a very good point, talking about airline safety, but we have drones today. We have a lot of other stuff going on, and we have billions of dollars being invested into this new technologies and drones, right? At some point, and we will see a lot of stuff happening in the air, in the sky, right? The technology is already there, right? People are already doing all of those things. It has been there, right? So coming to your point of having flights without pilots, do you think? I mean, when you see drones doing those things, right? Obviously, at some point, do you see that happening at any point of time?
It already is. I mean, we saw what Ukraine was able to do a couple of weeks ago in Russia, where they wiped out a third of their kind of strategic bomber fleet with AI-driven drones, and some of those were hand-driven and that, but not all of them. So we know the capability is there, right? We're seeing a lot of that specifically on the defense side. So military aviation especially. Actually, this is where we're seeing the most impact and the most disruption, is the idea of it's not. When we think of artificial intelligence in its disruption level, we think of how smart can it be. That's not necessarily what's disruptive. What's disruptive, especially in aviation, especially in military, is how many moderately intelligent things, autonomous things, can I make, right? And can I send them all at once, right? So from a military perspective, it's all about scaling as fast as you can and just overwhelm defenses that are used to pointing at individual airplanes or whatever. Now you have 1,000, half smart drones coming your way. You have enough, it just kind of works. So we're actually seeing more of that, but that's more in the military side. AI is being used all the time, specifically for like the customer experience as well. And I don't want to underestimate how important and really kind of disruptive that is in its own right. Even if it's not flying the airplane, it is kind of additive and disruptive to the industry. And I'll give you an example of this. United Airlines has built a system. Chicago or Houston is a big hub for them. And what they've realized is it's depending on if you're at the back of the airplane, if you have an hour connection. So let's say you're flying through Chicago, you have an hour connection and you're at the back of the airplane. It takes you 20 minutes to get off. Now, how far do you have to walk to get to your airplane and they're boarding, and how How early, and multiply that possible combination by 150 people per airplane, and you can start to apply very interesting AI models to optimize even to the level of which gates do these airplanes park at to minimize the disruption to the individual passengers in aggregate. Fascinating operational example of how various algorithms, not just AI, but just even traditional algorithms, kind of optimization algorithms, are being put into place to improve the overall passenger experience, or to increase reliability or on-time performance, these type of things.
You got a good point. Since you talked about passenger experience, right? I want to give you my own personal experience. We have a lot of airlines, and we also have Southwest. Southwest doesn't have any seating arrangement, right? You just first come first go, right? What's your take on that? And do you see anything changing in future?
It just changed a couple weeks ago. After 50 years of the airline being in operation, it just changed. But why it just changed is the interesting point. It was purely a what can I charge more for perspective. So the whole reason why Southwest did not have assigned seats was because it was faster. When you have an assigned seat, you're looking for your seat. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sitting there. Can you get up? And I get in there and let me get my bag. And it took a long time. And Southwest is built to what we call turn an airplane quickly. So the airplane comes to the gate, everybody gets off, new people get on. Airplanes don't make money when they're not flying. So you want to turn it as quickly as you can. The industry has since evolved to, Southwest is all economy, right? Well, other airlines have premium economy, they have business class, they have first class. You have people paying more to sit into some of those seats, paying to choose to sit at the front of the airplane versus the back of the airplane. So Southwest has migrated to, it's actually a combination of those two things. You still stand in line. They still call the groups, but you have a seat, which, by the way, I think is the most, in my uneducated opinion, is the most optimized. Because if there's one thing I hate about aviation, it's when any airline calls and says, okay, now boarding group 3, and everybody goes, and there's this mob of people that are all trying to get on the airplane. Everybody's rushing because they want to get the bag space and this and that, right? So Southwest has just made this shift, but it's been a financial reason, not necessarily a technical or kind of an optimized reason. It was actually optimized for that. So they've since changed, but that kind of carries into kind of some of the other interesting parts of where AI is being used by some of the airlines, and Southwest has their own models. But we talk about the turn time of an airplane while it's at the gate. There's a company out there right now. What they're doing is they're working with the airlines to tap into the security cameras that are looking out at the aircraft. From that, they can use image recognition AI models to determine, okay, when did we plug in the airplane? The electrical. Okay, when did the fueler show up? When were the bags coming off? Did they do it at appropriate times? And they're collecting metrics to feed those then into their machine learning models and just their analysts and their operational teams to know, okay, we had some issues, or we're having issues on the ramp at this level. And that's not somebody watching. That's a camera with image recognition models and software that's identifying when these individual things are happening and collecting that data for kind of feature analysis. I find that absolutely fascinating, right? Pure kind of more traditional AI, not generative, but definitely an example of how they're using that on the operational side.
Recently, mainly in the airline industry, even if you take last 3 months, we've seen a lot of accidents. Can AI become a solution for some of these accidents?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure. The word solution is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. Yeah. But understanding the accidents, absolutely, AI is already in use to understand this, right? So We just had the accident in India. There are a lot of factors, and we don't know what caused that yet. But there are a lot of factors that just need to be looked at. One of them that you know very well is it gets hot in India. Heat affects airplanes in different ways. Now, that's not the first time airplanes have been operating in hot environments, but if we take the heat that was there that day compared to where it is in other regions, that aircraft, how it's been used, has it had any long-term effect on the engines? This is just an example. I doubt heat had anything to do with it, but these are the type of things where we can just collect more and more data. And I liken it to how high off the earth we can get. So humans have lived among these structures that turn out to be these giant, they're like mounds, earth mounds, that are the shapes of like giant animals. We never knew it because we couldn't get high enough to see it. We just thought they were bumps, right? So AI allows us to just get higher and higher and see that bigger and bigger and bigger picture over a bigger time. From an aviation safety perspective, absolutely, that only improves our ability to learn from the challenges we saw in the past that maybe we thought were not related, and then apply those going forward, or at least find the answers. To your question is, are we seeing more crashes now? Not actually.
That's
It's
since you look at all the data, right? If you look at last years of data, how is the data looking for accidents for airline industry?
so the number of accidents were down during COVID, right? So we could say that was one of the safest periods, but
There's no
just
flight.
because there's no flying, right? But it's something you really need to consider. So we are now in. It's not a problem. It's a good thing. But aviation is so safe that we're not looking at statistics or accident rates or probabilities. We're looking at binary events. I'll give you an example. In the U.S., before the accident in D.C. this spring, the last fatal passenger, the last crash that we had was in 2008, right? So if you're looking at a spreadsheet, that spreadsheet reads 1 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 1. Draw a trend on that, right? Which is great. You can't draw a trend, which is great because it's so safe. The point is that we're now binary, right? This is an increment of what's it going to be 0 or 1, and maybe it's 2, hopefully not, type of thing. That's how safe aviation has become. At the same time, our coverage, our ability to see things around the world, the number of video cameras that we all carry now, or that are on the side of buildings. We now have at least 2 really amazing and tragic video views of this accident, this Air India accident that just took place. That's, from an accident perspective, from an accident investigation perspective, is great. We have more information. But from a public perception perspective, I just saw that. And it's unnerving. I'm sure you've seen it. I'm a pilot. It's unnerving. I think a little bit about that. We have never had more things recorded around the world than we do now. So if you combine those 2 elements, that aviation safety is pretty binary, right? It happens so little, that it's so safe that the trends are hard to find if there are any. If you combine that with the fact that whenever something does happen, the chance of us seeing it from a disturbing angle, I guess is the way I'm putting it, is really high. So we're seeing more of what happens less. And it feels more dangerous. And I hope I'm right about that because we just are until the next one happens, right? But I can tell you that each of these accidents, except for the two 737 MAX crashes, except for those two accidents, every crash has been for very specific and very different circumstances, which is good. There's no trend there. They're one-off, very oddball things. Again, except for those two, which have since been fixed. So you should feel safe flying.
Courtney, one thing I want to cover today is, mainly keeping in mind the future generation, the students, right? What is one piece of advice that you would give them if they have to build a career in data, mainly in the AI space?
So I think the first piece of advice I would give is find your passion. And I'm speaking from somebody who's in aviation. So we're in aviation because this is a really sexy industry, right? We have airplanes and this and that. So we're passionate about aviation. And I spend a lot of time from that perspective. I'm passionate about this industry, the networks, how everything lines up, that data, the AI models are an application for that passion. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to find the best tool, which oftentimes is not AI, or oftentimes is AI, or different types of, like we talked briefly off camera about sentiment analysis, right? So here's a way for us to put data towards feelings, right? So just the idea of broadening out into other areas as opposed to just being a data specialist. And I'll tell you why that's so important, especially for students looking forward, because AI is getting better. Even if the models are kind of moving in different directions, we're getting the new models that incorporate all sorts of new decision trees, and just the lower cost. What that means for future students, what it means for today's students, future kind of people in the space, is that AI is getting better at doing the things that the technical things that you do, which means you have to be able to expand beyond that, right? I think of the people in the 1950s. There was a huge industry of mathematicians. Don't know what their actual title was, but these were the people who were doing paper math, and the engineers would come up with their designs and this and that, and they would send their designs and their equations to the mathematicians, and they would crunch the numbers. That's what they did, and they were very smart, and they were very good at that, and they are completely and utterly obsolete today. They were when the calculator came out in effect, in computers, right? What you're seeing today from AI replacing people is not new. It's just new for the people who write code, right? So it's new for the people that it's approaching. So you have to be able to expand beyond that, and that means find what you're interested in, and then consider if AI is the tool for that, as opposed to, and there's a term that we kind of have in this country that is, don't be a hammer looking for a nail, right? Which is, don't have one tool. You're like, okay, I got this tool. I know how to use it. There's a nail, bang, right? There's a screw, bang, whoops, wasn't the right tool. Well, I don't use screwdrivers, so sorry, that's somebody else's job. No, the way you will excel in the future is to be broad and to understand which tool to use. AI will be a very big tool in that toolbox. Your job is to carry the toolbox. A lot of that's going to be just traditional regression, just the data analysis. But can you tell that story? We talked about communication and how important that is. That absolutely is a tool that should be in that toolbox. So it's not just about, do I grab the best, the most powerful AI model? Am I doing the absolute best? It's, what other tools are you attaching onto that? Because AI is going to be the best at very specific tasks. So this is about, how do you expand beyond that. There's something that I tell. I think if there's one concept I tell all new people who either join me or have worked for me in the past, it's this: give me what I want, not what I asked for. That very specific, seemingly contradictory statement is so important in how you move through kind of the professional space, adding value each way. What I'm really saying is think like a leader. I don't mean like think with leadership. I mean, what would be my problem? If I'm your boss, make me look good. But in order to do that, you need to think like me. And that's thinking like having the toolbox instead of the tool. How do you think really then how do you think outside the box to add another cliche? But if we think of working and analyzing and finding insights as a concept of kind of going from what to how to why. The what is, what should I do? Do you know the model? Great. You went through code camp. You did these things. You're proficient. You can do the code and you can build the model. Great. That, by the way, is step one. A lot of junior programmers stop at step one. AI already does that better. Be aware of that. But you have to do that to get to step two, which is the how. How can I improve this? How can this be done better? Optimize it. What am I missing? What are some of the things? You start to get into that next level of thinking. You need to be there, right? With AI is going to do the what better than anybody. You need to be in the how, and then you ultimately want to be in the why. Why are we doing this? Why? What is my team really looking for? What adds value to what we're doing? Why are we building this? And that is that kind of ultimate level of learning. And that's how I promise your managers will be thinking, their managers will be thinking. And if you start to think why, you're really giving them what they want. It's difficult for managers to tell you what they're asking for, right? They want you to solve their why, at least the how, but the why. And that really means expanding that toolbox beyond those specific tool sets to the how, into the why, the hammers, the screwdrivers, AI, regression, data visualization, writing, simple writing, or being able to sit in front of a podcast and sound like an idiot for over an hour and not worry about it, right? These type of skills you need to really consciously put into your toolbox to help answer the why.
Being an entrepreneur, right? What was something that you've learned and which you can share, which no flight school can teach the future generation?
Yeah, I would say the biggest lesson I've learned is the realization that everybody's just faking it. I mean, look, when you're in flight school, when this happens, you do this. Here's a checklist. These are the things. Leadership, you stand up with confidence, and you know every possible combination of things that might happen and what you would do in that instance. We say you always stay ahead of the airplane, so you never feel like the airplane's going so fast you can't keep up with it. In being a founder, you apply those and they're valuable, but what I really learned is that nobody really has all of their stuff together. It's just a matter of who's willing to do it, who's willing to stand up and say something, by the way, that might be wrong, right? And the trick is, a lot of founders do this. The trick is in feeling confident enough to stand up and say it, but the really good ones are okay being wrong. And when somebody says, hey, that's wrong, be like, oh, I think you're right. You might be right. That's interesting. let's look at that and really kind of understand that. So many people, and what I found is I did this when I was a founder, I stopped, right? So I was afraid to be wrong, so I wouldn't push forward, and so the path stopped. And I'm surprised by how many people in the entrepreneur community, they pushed forward and then figured it out along the way. And they're really good. They're way better at that than I am. And realizing that from a leadership perspective, either if it's just myself and my own internal mentality, just the confidence to just try things, to do a podcast, to stand up and speak at a conference, to write and say, hey, I think this is happening, and to be wrong about it, and have some angry person on the internet say, you're wrong. And then to be able to be like, to be able to respond to that, oh, yeah, I think you're right. I think I am wrong. Oh, that's kind of interesting. To be interested in being wrong type of thing. And then what you'll find from a leadership perspective is that creates more of a culture and people follow that. It's okay being wrong. Like, as long as you're trying. Curiosity, I'm a huge fan of curiosity. And in order to enable that and to extrapolate and find these new ideas, you're going to be wrong from time to time. Don't be afraid to be wrong. And even more importantly, from a leader's perspective, build the culture that it's totally okay to be wrong. It is totally okay. Because that's the quickest way to find out what the right answer is. Fire, aim, fire, aim, fire, aim, right?
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming for my podcast today. Appreciate it.
No, thank you. It's my honor. I enjoyed it.